My sister-in-law trapped my daughter in their basement during Christmas. I arrived with 35 police officers. How could family do this? Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. Before we begin, I'd be truly grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me keep sharing these stories with those who need them most. My days often begin in the quiet solitude of my Brooklyn apartment, where the sounds of the bustling city outside contrast sharply with the silence inside. I am 72 years old, and I've learned to find comfort in routine. The radiator clanks in the morning, a familiar sound that has woken me for nearly 40 years in this same rent-controlled building on President Street. I reach for my reading glasses on the nightstand, the frames worn smooth from decades of use, and check my phone. It's a habit now, this checking, this waiting for messages that sometimes come and sometimes don't. That Christmas Eve morning started like any other December day in Brooklyn. I could see my breath fog the window as I looked out at the brownstones across the street, their stoops dusted with fresh snow. The smell of coffee from the bodega downstairs mixed with the scent of pine from the small tree I decorated alone in my living room. Emily, my daughter, had left 2 days earlier to spend Christmas with her aunt, my sister-in-law Patricia, in her sprawling house in Garden City, Long Island. Patricia had insisted, as she always did, with that tone that made refusal seem like betrayal. I'd texted Emily the night before. "Just checking in, sweetheart. How's everything going?" No response. I told myself she was busy, caught up in holiday preparations. Maybe her phone was charging in another room. But mothers know. We know in our bones when something isn't right. I called. The phone rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I tried again. And again. By noon, my hands were shaking as I gripped the phone, my arthritis making my fingers ache with the tension. I sat at my small kitchen table, the same Formica table where I'd fed Emily as a child, where we'd done homework together, where we'd shared countless meals when money was tight and love was abundant. I stared at the phone, willing it to light up with her name. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in. I picked up the landline. Yes, I still keep one, an old habit, and dialed Patricia's number. It rang 3 times before she answered, her voice syrupy sweet in that way that always set my teeth on edge. "Oh, Emily's fine," she said dismissively. "She's just resting. You know how young people are, always on their phones. She probably needs a break from all that screen time." I heard something in the background, a muffled sound I couldn't quite place. Patricia's laugh was sharp, cutting through the phone line. "Don't worry so much. You'll give yourself a heart attack with all that stress. We'll see you tomorrow for dinner, remember? 2 o'clock sharp. Don't be late." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there holding the silent receiver, my reflection staring back at me from the darkened window. An old woman with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing the same cardigan I'd owned for 15 years, the blue one with the pill balls on the elbows. I looked tired. I looked defeated. I looked like someone who had spent a lifetime bending, accommodating, sacrificing, and never quite measuring up. I thought about the text message I'd received from Patricia 3 weeks earlier. "We need to talk about Christmas. And by talk, I mean you need to contribute. I'm hosting after all. And these things aren't cheap. You know how much I do for this family. $200 should cover your share." I'd sent the money immediately, as I always did, withdrawing it from my modest savings account, the one I'd been building slowly from my pension and the small inheritance my mother had left me when she passed 5 years ago. The memories came flooding back as I sat in that kitchen, the winter light fading outside. I remembered Patricia 23 years ago, when her husband Mark had left her suddenly, running off with a woman from his office. She'd shown up at my door at midnight, mascara streaking her face, 2 crying children clinging to her designer coat. I'd taken her in without hesitation. She and her kids had lived in my apartment for 8 months while she got back on her feet. I'd shared my bedroom with her daughter, sleeping on a cot while Patricia took my bed. I'd watched her children after school while she went to therapy and job interviews. I'd paid for groceries, for their school supplies, for the small luxuries that made them feel normal when their world had fallen apart. She never said thank you. Not once. Instead, as the years passed, she reminded me constantly that I owed her for staying in my life, for including me in family gatherings, for allowing Emily to know her cousins. "You should be grateful," she'd say, "that I haven't cut you off completely. After all, you're not exactly easy to deal with. Always so sensitive, always so needy." I worked as a nurse for 42 years at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. Night shifts, double shifts, holidays, weekends. I'd held dying patients' hands when their families couldn't be bothered to visit. I'd cleaned wounds and emptied bedpans and saved lives with my quick thinking and steady hands. But Patricia always made me feel small, insufficient, as though my entire existence was a burden she bore with martyred patients. I remembered my 60th birthday, 12 years ago. I'd hoped for a small celebration, maybe dinner at that Italian restaurant on Court Street that I loved. Patricia had promised to organize something. When the day came, nothing. No call, no visit, no card. When I mentioned it the following week, she'd rolled her eyes. "Oh, was that your birthday? I've been so busy. You know how it is. You understand, don't you? You're always so understanding." And I had nodded, swallowing my disappointment like bitter medicine, telling myself that birthdays weren't important anyway, that I was being childish to expect acknowledgement. When I'd been diagnosed with breast cancer 7 years ago, Patricia had visited me once in the hospital. She'd stayed for 20 minutes, spending most of that time on her phone, texting. Before she left, she'd leaned down and whispered, "Don't tell anyone about this. It's embarrassing. People will think there's something wrong with our family." I'd gone through chemotherapy alone, taking the subway to my appointments, my bald head covered with a scarf I'd bought at a thrift store. Emily had been away at college, and I hadn't wanted to worry her during finals. Patricia never asked how I was doing. The financial support had been constant over the years. When Patricia wanted to renovate her kitchen, I'd contributed $5,000 from my savings. When her son needed a car for college, I'd sent $3,000. When her daughter's wedding required a lavish venue in the Hamptons, I'd given $2,000 despite barely being able to afford my own rent that month. Patricia always had a way of making these requests sound like emergencies, like I was the only one who could help, like refusing would prove I didn't really love my family. I'd even helped her invest some money in the stock market 5 years ago, introducing her to a financial advisor my colleague had recommended. She'd been skeptical at first, but when her portfolio had grown significantly, she'd acted as though it was all her own brilliance. She never mentioned my role in connecting her to those opportunities. She never mentioned that the initial capital had come partially from the money I'd loaned her interest-free. Now, sitting in my kitchen as darkness fell on Christmas Eve, I felt something shift inside me. The teacup in my hand trembled, and before I could stop myself, it slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound was sharp, final. I stared at the broken pieces, at the puddle of cold tea spreading across the linoleum, and I began to cry. Not the quiet, dignified tears I'd learned to cry silently, so no one would be inconvenienced by my sadness. These were deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere I'd kept locked away for decades. How many times had I sat alone in this apartment, waiting for a phone call that never came? How many holidays had I spent by myself, because Patricia had decided at the last minute that there wasn't room at the table, that the gathering was just for immediate family, that I'd understand, wouldn't I? How many times had I watched Emily grow distant, influenced by Patricia's subtle comments about how grandmother was a bit much, a bit overwhelming, a bit too emotional? I got up slowly, my knees protesting, and fetched the broom to sweep up the broken china. As I bent down, I caught sight of myself in the reflection of the oven door. An old woman on her hands and knees, cleaning up another mess, alone on Christmas Eve. I thought about my daughter, unreachable in Patricia's house. I thought about the sound I'd heard in the background during that phone call. I thought about Patricia's too quick reassurance, her dismissive tone. Something was wrong. I knew it with the same certainty I'd known when Emily had pneumonia as a toddler, when I'd rushed her to the emergency room against the doctor's initial advice that it was just a cold. I'd been right then. I was right now. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the old photo albums I kept in the closet. Pictures of Emily as a baby, as a child, as a teenager. Pictures of family gatherings before Patricia's bitterness had poisoned everything. I ran my fingers over the images, remembering when love had felt simple, when family had meant safety rather than obligation. I closed the albums and put them back in the closet, but this time I placed them at the very bottom, under old sweaters and forgotten scarves. I wasn't sure why. Perhaps I was preparing for something, some change I couldn't yet name. I made myself a cup of tea with shaking hands and sat by the window, watching the snow fall on the Brooklyn streets below. Families hurried past carrying presents, their laughter muffled by the glass. I'd been that woman once, I thought. I'd been the mother holding her daughter's hand, believing that love and sacrifice would be enough, that giving everything would ensure I'd never be alone. But I was alone now, and my daughter was somewhere I couldn't reach her. And every instinct I possessed was screaming that something terrible was happening in that house in Garden City, behind Patricia's perfect facade and her carefully curated Christmas decorations. I looked at my phone again. Still nothing from Emily. I tried calling Patricia's house one more time. No answer. I tried Emily's number, straight to voicemail. The panic that had been building in my chest all day suddenly crystallized into something else. Not fear, not anymore. Something harder, sharper. Determination. I thought about the women I'd cared for in the hospital, the ones who'd stayed in abusive situations too long, who'd made excuses for family members who hurt them, who'd died with regrets on their lips. I thought about the advice I'd given them, advice I'd never followed myself. You deserve better, I'd told them. You don't have to accept this. There's still time to save yourself. The night deepened outside my window. Christmas Eve stretched before me, empty and cold. I sat in my chair, my tea growing cold in my hands, and I made a decision. For the first time in my 72 years, I decided that I mattered, that my daughter mattered, that we deserved more than Patricia's cruelty dressed up as family obligation. I didn't know yet what I would do, but I knew I would do something. The old woman who had spent decades accommodating, apologizing, shrinking herself to fit into spaces that didn't want her. That woman was breaking apart like the teacup on my kitchen floor. What would rise from those pieces I didn't yet know, but I could feel it beginning, this transformation, this terrible, necessary change. I pulled my old cardigan tighter around my shoulders and watched the snow fall, each flake unique and temporary and beautiful despite its brevity. Tomorrow was Christmas. Tomorrow, I would find my daughter. Tomorrow, I would stop being afraid of the truth. But tonight, I would sit with this new feeling, this unfamiliar sense that perhaps, finally, I had the right to demand more than crumbs from the table of my own family. The city hummed outside, alive with celebration and joy. Inside my apartment, something else was being born. Not joy, not yet, but something just as powerful. The first stirrings of self-respect, the beginning of the word I'd never learned to say. No. I remembered something my mother had told me before she died. Her thin hand gripping mine in the hospital bed. She'd looked at me with eyes that saw too much and said, "You've always been too kind, too forgiving. Someday you'll have to choose between being kind and being whole." I hadn't understood then. I'd thought kindness and wholeness were the same thing. I'd been wrong. As midnight approached and Christmas Eve became Christmas Day, I stood up from my chair by the window. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass. I looked old, yes. Tired, yes. But I saw something else there too. A flicker of something I hadn't seen in decades. A woman who'd worked night shifts to put food on the table. A woman who'd survived cancer alone. A woman who'd held countless patients in their final moments and helped them find peace. A woman who'd raised a daughter to be strong and independent, even when that daughter didn't always see her that way. I was not nothing. I was not a burden. I was not grateful for scraps. I was a 72-year-old woman with arthritis and a pension and 42 years of nursing experience and a mother's instinct that something was very, very wrong. And tomorrow, Christmas Day, I would act on that instinct. Not tomorrow afternoon at Patricia's perfectly timed dinner. Tomorrow morning. Early. Before anyone expected me. I went to bed that night with my phone on the nightstand, checking it every few minutes. Still nothing from Emily. The silence was its own kind of answer. I lay in the darkness of my bedroom, listening to the sounds of Brooklyn celebrating around me. Somewhere in the building, a party was happening. Music and laughter filtered through the walls. Life was going on for other people, normal and joyful and uncomplicated. My life had never been uncomplicated, but it had been mine. And Emily was mine. And I would not spend another day pretending that Patricia's treatment of us was acceptable, was normal, was something I had to endure because family is family and blood is thicker than water. Blood, I thought bitterly, could also drown you if you weren't careful. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, I lay there planning, thinking, preparing for the morning. I didn't know exactly what I would find in Patricia's house. But I knew I would find the truth, and I knew that whatever happened next, I wouldn't be the same woman I'd been yesterday. That woman was gone, shattered on the kitchen floor with the teacup. This new woman, the one being born in the darkness of Christmas Eve, would be different, stronger, less afraid. The radiator clanked and hissed, that familiar sound, but nothing else felt familiar anymore. I was stepping into unknown territory, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't apologizing for taking up space, for demanding answers, for refusing to be dismissed. The snow continued to fall outside my window, covering Brooklyn in white, making everything look clean and new. Perhaps, I thought before finally drifting into uneasy sleep, I could be new too. Perhaps it wasn't too late. Perhaps transformation could happen even at 72, even on Christmas Eve, even in the heart of loneliness and fear. Perhaps, I thought, I could save us both, my daughter and myself. And perhaps in doing so, I would finally learn what it meant to be whole. I woke at 5 a.m. on Christmas Day, my body trained by decades of early nursing shifts to rise before dawn. The apartment was cold, the heat not quite reaching my bedroom adequately, a problem I'd learned to live with because calling the landlord felt like too much trouble, like asking for too much. That thought stopped me as I was reaching for my robe. When had I learned to make myself so small? When had I decided that warmth was asking too much? I dressed quickly in the darkness, pulling on my sensible pants, my warm sweater, my winter coat. I checked my phone. Nothing. I called Emily's number again. Voicemail. I tried Patricia's house. No answer. It was early, yes, but something in my gut told me that answers weren't coming through phone calls. I needed to see my daughter. I needed to look into her eyes and know she was safe. The subway was nearly empty on Christmas morning, just a few workers heading to shifts and homeless individuals seeking warmth. I sat in the bright fluorescent light, watching the tunnel walls flash past, my hands folded in my lap, my heart pounding. What would I do when I got there? Knock on the door? Demand to see Emily? Patricia would be angry. She was always angry when I didn't follow her rules, when I stepped outside the boundaries she'd set for our relationship. For years, I'd believed that keeping peace was the same as keeping family. I'd believed that if I just tried harder, gave more, asked for less, eventually Patricia would see my worth. Eventually she'd treat me with the respect and love I'd shown her. But that day never came. Instead, the demands increased. The criticism grew sharper. The distance between what I gave and what I received became a chasm I couldn't cross no matter how much I sacrificed. I remembered a conversation with my friend Dorothy 3 years ago. We'd been having coffee at the diner on Fifth Avenue, the one with the good pie and the waitress who'd worked there for 30 years. Dorothy had asked about Emily, about Patricia, about Christmas plans. I'd made excuses, as always, explaining why I wouldn't be at the family gathering. Dorothy had put down her coffee cup and looked at me with such sadness. "Honey," she'd said gently, "when are you going to see that they're using you? When are you going to understand that you deserve better than this?" I'd bristled at her words, defensive. "They're family," I'd said. "It's complicated." "You don't understand." Dorothy had shaken her head. "I understand plenty. I understand you're one of the kindest women I've ever known, and they're taking advantage of that kindness. There's nothing complicated about cruelty." I'd stopped having coffee with Dorothy after that. Her words had stung too much, had gotten too close to truths I wasn't ready to face. Now, riding the Long Island Railroad toward Garden City as the winter sun rose pale and cold, I understood what Dorothy had been trying to tell me. She hadn't been attacking my family. She'd been defending me. And I'd pushed her away for it, because acknowledging her truth would have meant acknowledging my own complicity in my mistreatment. Garden City looked picture-perfect in the Christmas morning light. Expensive houses with wreaths on the doors and lights strung across perfect lawns. Patricia's house was the largest on the block, a sprawling colonial with white columns that she'd bought after her divorce settlement came through. I'd never understood how she'd afforded it until years later, when I learned Mark's guilt over the affair had led to a very generous settlement. That money, combined with smart investments in the stock market, had made Patricia quite comfortable financially. Yet she still asked me for money regularly, still made me feel like I owed her, still acted as though my small contributions were all that kept her afloat. I stood on the sidewalk outside her house for a long moment, gathering courage. The house looked dark despite it being after 7 in the morning. No lights in the windows, no movement. Patricia's car was in the driveway and Emily's small sedan was parked on the street. My daughter was here. But where? And why wasn't she answering her phone? I walked up the perfect paved pathway and knocked on the door. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. I tried the doorbell. Silence. I pulled out my phone and called the house number. I could hear the ringing from inside, but no one answered. My heart began to race. Something was very wrong. I could feel it like a physical weight on my chest. I walked around the side of the house, peering in windows. The living room looked normal. Christmas tree in the corner, presents underneath, everything neat and expensive. The kitchen was dark. I moved to the back of the house where Patricia had added a sunroom extension 2 years ago. I'd contributed $1,000 to that project, money I'd saved for a new winter coat. I'd worn my old one for another season instead. The back door was locked. I tried the windows, all secure. I stood in Patricia's perfect backyard with its perfect landscaping and felt panic rising in my throat. Where was my daughter? Why wasn't anyone answering? The rational part of my mind said maybe they were sleeping. Maybe they'd turned off their phones to enjoy a peaceful Christmas morning. But the mother in me, the nurse who'd learned to read vital signs and trust her instincts, knew better. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never imagined doing. I called the police. My hands shook as I dialed 911. When the operator answered, I felt suddenly foolish. What was I going to say? My daughter is at her aunt's house and not answering her phone? They'd think I was crazy, overreacting, a paranoid old woman. But I thought about the muffled sound I'd heard during yesterday's call with Patricia. I thought about Emily's complete silence. I thought about all the times Patricia had lied to me, manipulated me, used me. I thought about the coldness in her voice when she'd told me not to worry. "My name is Margaret Sullivan," I said to the operator, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to report a welfare check. My daughter, Emily Sullivan, came to visit her aunt for Christmas, and I haven't been able to contact her for over 24 hours. I'm concerned for her safety. The address is 247 Maple Drive, Garden City. The operator asked questions. How old was Emily? 31. When did I last hear from her? 2 days ago, before she arrived here. Had there been any threats or violence? Not that I knew of. Did she have any medical conditions? No. Why was I concerned? Because I knew my daughter, and this silence wasn't normal. Because something in my gut said she needed help. The operator said an officer would come by to do a welfare check. I should wait outside the house. I thanked her and ended the call, then immediately felt a wave of doubt. Had I overreacted? Would Patricia be furious with me for bringing police to her home on Christmas morning? Would Emily be embarrassed? Maybe she'd just been sleeping. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe I was being the dramatic, needy mother that Patricia always said I was. But I stayed. I sat on the cold stone wall at the edge of Patricia's property and I waited. 20 minutes later, a police car pulled up. One officer, middle-aged with kind eyes, got out and approached me. Mrs. Sullivan? I nodded. He asked me to explain the situation. I told him everything I could while trying not to sound hysterical. He listened carefully, then approached the house and knocked loudly. Police. Open up. Nothing. He knocked again. Police? Welfare check? More nothing. He looked back at me, his expression more serious now. He spoke into his radio, requesting backup. Within minutes, 2 more cars arrived. The officers conferred quietly. Then one of them went around the back of the house while another tried the doorbell again. This time, after a long moment, the door opened a crack. Patricia stood there in her expensive silk robe, her face a mask of indignation. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. "Do you know what time it is? It's Christmas morning." The officer explained they were doing a welfare check on Emily Sullivan. Patricia's face hardened. "Emily is fine. She's sleeping. This is completely unnecessary. My mother-in-law is being dramatic, as usual. She has a history of overreacting. The way she said it made me sound unhinged, unstable. I felt shame creep up my neck. But the officer didn't dismiss me. He said firmly, "Ma'am, I need to see Emily Sullivan and confirm she's okay." Patricia's jaw tightened. "This is harassment. I don't consent to you entering my home." The officer remained calm. "We have reason to believe someone in this house may need assistance. We can do this cooperatively, or we can get a warrant. Your choice." Patricia stared at him for a long moment, then stepped back and opened the door wider. "Fine, come in. Emily is upstairs sleeping. I'll wake her." But this is ridiculous. The officers entered and I followed, my heart pounding. Patricia shot me a look of pure hatred as I passed her in the doorway. "You've done it now," she hissed under her breath. "You'll regret this." We stood in the foyer while Patricia went upstairs, her footsteps heavy on the expensive carpeting. Minutes passed. She came back down alone. "She's not in her room," Patricia said, her voice tight. "She must have gone out early for a walk." The officers exchanged glances. "Her car is outside," one of them pointed out. Patricia's face flushed. "Then maybe she went with a friend." "I don't know. I'm not her keeper." One of the officers spoke into his radio again. More backup was coming. They began searching the house, Patricia protesting loudly about warrants and rights and lawsuits. I stood frozen in the foyer, my worst fears materializing. Emily wasn't in her room. Patricia was lying. Something terrible had happened. An officer came up from the basement. The door was locked from the outside, he said. When we opened it, we found a woman down there. She says her name is Emily Sullivan. She appears unharmed but shaken. She says she's been locked in since last night. Patricia's face went white. "That's absurd," she sputtered. "Why would I lock her in the basement? She must have gotten confused. The door sticks sometimes." The officer's expression was hard now. The door was locked with a deadbolt. From the outside. "Ma'am, you need to explain what's happening here." Patricia started to speak, then stopped, her mouth opening and closing. I pushed past them and ran toward the basement stairs. "Emily!" I called. "Emily! Sweetheart, I'm here." My daughter appeared at the top of the basement stairs, wrapped in a blanket one of the officers had given her. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. "Mom," she whispered, and I pulled her into my arms, feeling her shake against me. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I should have listened to you. I should have known." I held her tighter, my own tears finally coming. "You're safe now. I've got you." The next hours were a blur. More police arrived. Patricia was questioned, her story changing multiple times. At first, she claimed Emily had locked herself in the basement by accident. Then she said Emily had been drunk and she'd put her there to sleep it off for her own safety. Finally, she broke down and admitted the truth. Emily had confronted her about money Patricia had borrowed from me over the years, money she'd claimed to have paid back but never had. Emily had found documents showing Patricia had even taken out a credit card in my name years ago, running up debt that I'd been paying off without knowing its true origin. When Emily had threatened to tell me everything, Patricia had panicked. She'd convinced Emily to come downstairs to look at old photo albums, then locked her in. She'd planned to keep her there until after Christmas, until she could figure out what to do, how to spin the story, how to maintain control. "It was only supposed to be for a day or two," Patricia kept saying, as if that made it better. I wasn't going to hurt her. I just needed time to think. I stood in Patricia's perfect living room, listening to her pathetic justifications, and felt something break free inside me. This woman, whom I'd supported for over 2 decades, whom I'd defended and forgiven and sacrificed for, had locked my daughter in a basement, had imprisoned her, had terrified her, all to hide theft and fraud and years of exploitation. Patricia was arrested on Christmas morning. As they led her out in handcuffs, she looked at me with such venom. "This is your fault," she spat. "You've always been jealous of me. You couldn't stand to see me succeed. You turned Emily against me." I stared back at her, and for the first time in our long, painful relationship, I felt nothing. No guilt, no obligation, no desperate need to make peace. Just emptiness where her power over me had been. The officers were kind to us. They took our statements. They explained that Emily could press charges if she wanted. They suggested we might want to speak to a lawyer about Patricia's financial crimes against me. One officer, the first one who'd arrived, pulled me aside as we were leaving. "You did the right thing calling us," he said. "Trust your instincts. You saved your daughter today." I nodded, unable to speak. Emily and I walked to her car in silence. The sun was higher now, the Christmas morning bright and cold. Other houses on the street had their lights on, families gathering for presents and breakfast, unaware of the drama that had unfolded at number 247. Emily's hand shook as she tried to unlock her car. "Here," I said gently, taking the keys. "Let me drive." We got in, and I started the engine, letting it warm up. Emily sat beside me, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said again. "For what?" I asked. "For believing her. For thinking you were being too sensitive about how she treated you. For not seeing what was happening." I reached over and took her hand. "You have nothing to apologize for. Patricia is very good at manipulation. She's had decades of practice." We drove back to Brooklyn in silence, both processing what had happened. I kept glancing at Emily, needing to confirm she was really there, really safe. When we pulled up outside my building, she looked at the familiar brownstone and started to cry. "Can I stay with you for a while?" she asked. "I don't want to be alone." "Of course," I said. "Stay as long as you need." We spent Christmas Day in my small apartment. I made simple food, nothing fancy. Scrambled eggs and toast, hot tea. We sat by the window and watched the neighborhood come alive with the holiday. I told Emily everything about the money I'd given Patricia over the years, about the sacrifices and the manipulation and the constant feeling of never being enough. Emily listened, crying sometimes, angry sometimes, reaching for my hand across the table. "I had no idea it was this bad," she said. "I knew she could be difficult, but I thought she was just stressed, you know? I thought you were being too sensitive when you said she hurt you. I'm so sorry, Mom. I should have believed you." I shook my head. "She made sure you wouldn't. That's what people like Patricia do. They isolate their victims, make them doubt themselves, turn family members against each other. You're not responsible for her choices." That evening, as we sat together watching the lights of Brooklyn twinkle in the winter darkness, Emily said, "What are you going to do? About Patricia? About the money she stole?" I thought about it for a long moment. "I'm going to call a lawyer after the holidays," I said. "I'm going to find out what my options are. But more than that, I'm done. I'm done trying to earn love from someone who can't give it. I'm done sacrificing myself for people who don't value the sacrifice. I'm done making myself small." Emily nodded. "Me too," she said. "I'm done pretending that toxic family is better than no family." We sat in companionable silence, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not happiness, not yet, but peace. The absence of constant tension, constant worry about saying the wrong thing or asking for too much. The freedom of simply being myself without apologizing for it. In the days that followed, more truths emerged. Patricia had indeed taken out credit cards in my name years ago. She'd forged my signature on loan applications. She'd told people I'd co-signed on her house, making me liable for her mortgage if she defaulted. The web of financial abuse was staggering. A lawyer I consulted, recommended by the police, said I had grounds for multiple lawsuits. But she also warned me that family cases are emotionally draining and expensive. I thought about it carefully. Part of me wanted justice, wanted Patricia to face consequences for everything she'd done. But another part of me, the part that was tired and healing and trying to rebuild, just wanted peace. I decided to pursue the credit fraud charges because those affected my credit score and my financial future. But the personal loans, the money I'd given freely even under manipulation, those I let go. Not because Patricia deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved to stop carrying the weight of her actions. Patricia's children reached out, angry and defensive. Their mother would never do such things, they insisted. I was lying, exaggerating, being vindictive. I didn't defend myself or argue. I simply stopped responding. Emily blocked their numbers. We created boundaries where none had existed before. The transformation wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was slow, painful, like learning to walk again after an injury. Some days I woke up and immediately thought about Patricia, about the years of mistreatment, and I felt angry all over again. Other days, I barely thought of her at all. I focused instead on rebuilding my relationship with Emily, on reconnecting with friends I'd neglected, on finding joy in small things I'd denied myself for years. I bought myself a new winter coat, a nice one, warm and in my favorite color. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. I said yes to coffee with Dorothy, who welcomed me back with open arms and no judgment. I learned to cook meals just for myself without feeling guilty about the expense or the effort. I started sleeping better, the constant anxiety that had plagued me for decades slowly loosening its grip. Emily stayed with me for 2 months, and it was a gift to both of us. We talked late into the night, processing years of family dysfunction, untangling the lies Patricia had told to keep us at odds with each other. We laughed together, cried together, healed together. When she finally moved back to her own place, it felt right. Not an abandonment, but a natural progression. She called me every day. We had dinner together twice a week. Our relationship, freed from Patricia's poisonous influence, bloomed into something genuine and healthy. 6 months after that terrible Christmas, I was sitting in my apartment on a warm June evening when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Sullivan?" a professional voice asked. "This is Detective Rodriguez from the Garden City Police Department. I wanted to update you on the Patricia Morgan case." My heart skipped. What happened? Patricia had accepted a plea deal, he explained. She'd pled guilty to identity theft and fraud. She'd received probation, community service, and was required to pay restitution. It wasn't prison time, which some part of me had hoped for, but it was official recognition of what she'd done. More importantly, she'd been ordered to have no contact with me or Emily. The legal system, imperfect as it was, had validated my truth. "Thank you for letting me know," I said. After I hung up, I sat for a long time with the news. I'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated. Instead, I felt mostly sad. Sad for the years I'd wasted trying to earn Patricia's love. Sad for the family that could have been, but never was. Sad for Patricia herself, whose need for control had destroyed her relationships and led her to such desperate actions. But underneath the sadness was something else. Relief. Closure. The legal ending to a long, painful chapter. I called Emily and told her the news. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Free," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. I feel free. That summer, Emily and I took a trip together. We drove up the coast to Maine, staying in small bed and breakfasts, eating lobster rolls, watching the ocean. We didn't talk much about Patricia. We talked instead about the future, about dreams, about possibilities. Emily had met someone, she told me shyly. Someone kind and stable who treated her well. "I'm learning what healthy love looks like," she said. "After watching Patricia manipulate everyone around her for so long, I'm learning that love shouldn't hurt." "I'm learning that too," I admitted. We sat on a rocky beach in Ogunquit, watching the waves crash against the shore. And I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Hope. Not the desperate hope that if I just tried harder, gave more, loved better, then people would treat me with respect, but simple, quiet hope that life could be good, that I deserved goodness, that there were years ahead of me still, and I could fill them with joy rather than obligation. As fall approached, and the anniversary of that terrible Christmas drew near, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed. I'd started volunteering at a women's shelter, using my nursing skills to help others, but also sharing my story with women escaping abusive situations. Emotional abuse, I learned, was just as damaging as physical abuse, and financial abuse was a common tactic of control. My story resonated with many of the women I met. They saw their own experiences reflected in mine. One woman, Maria, a 45-year-old whose mother had exploited her for years, said something that stuck with me. "It's hard to recognize abuse when it comes from family. We're taught that blood is thicker than water, that you stand by family no matter what. But sometimes, the people who hurt us most are the ones we're supposed to trust most. Learning to protect yourself from family feels like betrayal, but it's not. It's survival." I thought about those words often. Survival. That's what I'd done. I'd survived decades of manipulation and exploitation, and when it mattered most, when Emily's safety was at risk, I'd found the strength to act. The old Margaret would have made excuses for Patricia, would have convinced herself it was all a misunderstanding, would have swept it under the rug to keep peace. But the new Margaret, the one born in that cold kitchen when the teacup shattered, had called the police, had demanded answers, had chosen her daughter over false family harmony. On Christmas Eve, 1 year after the incident, Emily and I were in my apartment decorating a small tree. It was a quiet celebration, just the two of us, and that felt perfect. We hung ornaments I'd collected over the years, each one holding a memory. "Look at this one," Emily said, holding up a glass angel I'd bought the year she was born. "Remember when I was little and I thought this angel was my guardian?" I remembered. I remembered so many things. The good times, when Emily was young and life was simpler. The hard times, working night shifts while she slept, trying to make ends meet. The lonely times, when Patricia's manipulation had created distance between us. And now, these new times. These healing times. As we finished the tree and sat down with mugs of hot chocolate, Emily said, "Thank you, Mom. For everything. For calling the police that morning. For always putting me first, even when it cost you. For teaching me what real love looks like by example, even when you didn't realize you were doing it." I felt tears prick my eyes, but they were good tears. Healing tears. "You don't need to thank me," I said. "You're my daughter. Protecting you isn't something I deserve praise for. It's simply what love does." She reached over and hugged me tight. "That's exactly what I mean," she said. "That's the difference between you and Patricia. You love without conditions. You give without keeping score. You protect without expecting something in return." We spent that Christmas together, cooking a simple meal, watching old movies, laughing at memories. No expensive gifts, no elaborate preparations, no stress or obligation. Just two women who'd survived something terrible together and came out stronger on the other side. As I went to bed that night, I realized I was genuinely happy. Not the fake happiness I'd performed for years, trying to convince myself I was fine. Real happiness. Deep contentment with where I was and who I'd become. The months continued to pass. I kept volunteering at the shelter. I took more art classes. I reconnected with my passion for gardening, planting flowers in pots on my small balcony. I said no to things I didn't want to do without guilt. I said yes to things that brought me joy without questioning whether I deserved them. I built a life that was mine, finally and fully mine. Dorothy and I became close again, meeting for coffee every week. She never said "I told you so," though she would have been justified. Instead, she celebrated my growth, my strength, my transformation. "You're different," she said one afternoon. "You hold yourself differently, like you're not apologizing for taking up space anymore." I smiled. "I'm not," I said. "I spent 72 years apologizing for existing. I'm done with that." Emily's relationship grew serious. She brought him to meet me, a kind man named James who worked as a teacher and loved hiking. He treated her with respect and gentleness, and I saw in her eyes that she'd truly learned what healthy love looked like. When they got engaged a year and a half after that terrible Christmas, I cried tears of joy. Not because marriage was some ultimate goal, but because Emily had found someone who valued her, who partnered with her, rather than trying to control her. At their small wedding in a Brooklyn botanical garden, Emily asked me to say a few words. I stood before the small gathering of friends and James's family, and I spoke from the heart. "Love," I said, "is not sacrifice without recognition. It's not giving until you have nothing left. Real love, the kind these two share, is mutual respect and support. It's choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. It's building each other up rather than tearing each other down." I looked at Emily as I spoke, and I saw her eyes fill with tears. "We've both learned hard lessons about what love isn't," I continued. "Today, we celebrate what love is. Partnership, kindness, safety, joy. May you build a life together based on these things, and may you never settle for less than you deserve." The guests applauded, and as I sat back down, I felt a profound sense of peace. This was the life lesson I'd learned through pain, and I was passing it on to my daughter through example. 3 years after that Christmas, I was sitting in my apartment on a spring morning when my phone rang. This time, I recognized the number. It was Patricia's daughter, calling from a number I hadn't blocked. I hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said, her voice uncertain. "It's Melissa. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to call." I waited, saying nothing. "My mother," she continued, her voice breaking. "She's dying. Cancer. Stage 4. She has a few months at most. She asked me to call you. She wants to see you, wants to apologize before she dies. I felt a complicated swirl of emotions. Anger that Patricia would make even her death about manipulation, about one last demand on my time and emotions. Sadness that a life had been lived so poorly that it was ending with desperate calls for forgiveness. Uncertainty about what the right thing to do was. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "I can't promise anything, but I'll think about it." Melissa thanked me and hung up. I sat with the news for several days, talking it over with Emily, with Dorothy, with my therapist, a woman I'd started seeing after everything happened who'd helped me process years of trauma. Everyone told me the decision was mine, that I didn't owe Patricia anything, not even a deathbed visit. In the end, I decided to go. Not for Patricia, but for myself. To close the chapter completely. Emily offered to come with me, but I said no. This was something I needed to do alone. I drove out to Garden City one warm May afternoon, to the hospice where Patricia was spending her final days. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd spent 42 years as a nurse, caring for the dying, and now I was visiting the woman who'd exploited me for decades in a similar facility. Patricia looked small in the hospital bed, her face gaunt, her eyes hollow. She'd been a large presence in my life for so long that seeing her reduced to this fragile shell was jarring. "Margaret," she whispered when she saw me. "Thank you for coming." I sat in the chair beside her bed but kept my distance. "What did you want to say to me, Patricia?" I asked. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. "I wanted to apologize. For everything. I was cruel to you. I used you. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't seem to stop. You were always so kind, so forgiving, and I took advantage of that. I'm sorry." Her words hung in the air between us. Part of me had wanted this apology for decades. Another part of me knew it was too little, too late. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "But I need you to understand something. Your apology doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't give me back the years I spent doubting myself, the money you stole, the relationship I almost lost with my daughter because of your manipulation. I've forgiven you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean we're okay." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "I know," she whispered. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I see now what I did. How much I hurt you. How wrong I was. I'm sorry." We sat in silence for a few minutes, and then I stood up. "I'm glad you have that clarity now," I said. "I hope it brings you some peace in your final days." "Goodbye, Patricia." I walked out of that hospice room and didn't look back. In my car, I sat for a long time, processing the encounter. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I didn't feel angry or sad. I felt complete. Like a circle had finally closed. Patricia's apology hadn't changed anything fundamental about my healing journey. I'd already done the work of forgiving and moving on, but it had given me something I needed. Confirmation that I hadn't been crazy or oversensitive, that the abuse had been real. Patricia died 6 weeks later. I didn't attend the funeral. Emily didn't either. We sent flowers with a simple card and left it at that. Her children were angry with us, but their anger no longer touched me. I'd learned to let go of trying to control other people's perceptions of me. I knew my truth. That was enough. Now, sitting here 4 years after that terrible Christmas, I am 76 years old. My life looks nothing like I expected it to when I was younger. I'm not surrounded by extended family. I don't have grand holiday gatherings. But I have something better. I have peace. I have my daughter, and we have a healthy, loving relationship. I have friends who value me. I have hobbies that bring me joy. I have self-respect. I think often about the woman I was before that Christmas Eve, the woman who made herself small, who apologized for existing, who believed her worth was measured by how much she could give. That woman is gone. In her place is someone stronger, clearer, more certain of her value. The transformation wasn't easy. It involved pain and loss and difficult choices, but it was necessary. It saved me. It saved Emily. It taught us both what real love looks like. On quiet mornings now, I sit by my window with my coffee and watch Brooklyn wake up around me. The same radiator still clanks, the same bodega still sells coffee downstairs. The same brownstones line the street, but everything feels different because I am different. I no longer wait anxiously for phone calls that might not come. I no longer measure my days by how much I can sacrifice for people who don't appreciate the sacrifice. I simply exist, fully and completely, without apology. My small apartment, once a place of loneliness, has become a sanctuary. I've filled it with art I created in my classes, plants that I tend with care, photos of Emily and me on our trips together, books I always meant to read, but never had time for because I was too busy trying to earn love from people who couldn't give it. Now I have time. Now I have peace. Now I have myself. The sunset through my window paints the sky in shades of orange and pink. I raise my glass of wine in a silent toast to the woman I've become, to the courage it took to call the police that Christmas morning, to the strength it took to set boundaries and stick to them, to the wisdom it took to understand that some relationships are too toxic to save, even if they're family. The story I've shared with you today is not just about abuse and escape. It's about reclaiming yourself after years of being told your needs don't matter. It's about learning that kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. It's self-destruction. It's about understanding that you can be a good person and still protect yourself. That saying no doesn't make you selfish. That choosing yourself isn't abandonment of others, it's survival. I want you to know that if you see yourself in my story, if you recognize the pattern of giving without receiving, of sacrificing without appreciation, of making yourself small to keep others comfortable, there is hope. Change is possible. Transformation can happen at any age. I was 72 when I finally learned to put myself first. You don't have to wait that long. The life lesson I've learned is simple but profound. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot love others well if you don't love yourself first. And the people who truly love you will not require you to diminish yourself to make them feel bigger. Real love lifts everyone up. Toxic relationships tear you down. And you always, always have the right to choose your own well-being over someone else's comfort. Have you ever lived something like this? Have you known someone who struggled with a family member who exploited their kindness? I invite you to share your story in the comments below. Sometimes, simply speaking our truth helps us heal. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or recognize something in your own life, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these stories with people who need to hear them. Stories of survival, stories of transformation, stories of learning to value yourself enough to set boundaries and stick to them. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for witnessing my pain and my healing. And remember, it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to say no. It's never too late to become the person you were always meant to be, before the world told you to make yourself smaller. The door to my past has closed softly behind me. Ahead lies a future I'm building with intention and care. A future where I matter, where my needs count, where my peace is the priority. And that future is beautiful not because it's perfect, but because it's mine, completely and unapologetically mine.